Hello, welcome to Image Bearers. This is the third season, episode 15. My name is Otoma Edje. I'm so excited today to have on the program Kyle Spears. He's going to be sharing some incredible things he's working on, and we'll get a chance to learn a little bit more about him. Assisting with the interview is Shari Simpson. She's a disciple in New Jersey. Got to know her a little bit last year, and she's fast becoming one of my best friends. And also joining us, assisting with the interview is First Timothy Tim Sherrill in the house from Omaha, Nebraska. He was here in Michigan for a number of years. We love him and his family dearly. We would give an arm, a leg, and so forth for them. So he's, again, as I said, an evangelist in Omaha. So just some information about Kyle. I'm just going to read this off. So Kyle is a disciple in the Omaha church. He is also a trauma counselor. He is a certified drug and alcohol counselor, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and also a licensed independent mental health professional. Kind of like a 007, all those licenses right there. You're also were a Division I basketball player, is my understanding. And you're actually pretty tall, if I understand correct, right?
Yeah. That you can't see it on the screen or hear it on the podcast, but yeah, I'm 6'10". Got a little height on me.
Wow, that's pretty traumatic when people. We'll leave that alone.
That would be traumatizing.
Yeah,
brother.
And you've also been married for almost 9 years, and I believe you have a little boy, Shay. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Glad they were able to let you get away to join us today. So again, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. So we're going to go ahead and start it out. Shari, can you take it away?
Absolutely, Kyle. I'm honored to be here and asking you some questions. I'm going to start out with the basics. Can you share about your spiritual journey and how God brought you into faith and his church?
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on. I would say it's interesting because I'm getting ready to preach tomorrow, and I'm going to go through a little of this in my sermon. So this is a nice kind of lead in. But I became a Christian when I was a senior in high school, and I had been looking for a church for a couple of years. When I was a sophomore, I had really a moment where I got into some sin. I got drunk for the first time with some friends. Long story short, my grandma made me go to church, and from that point on, I was convicted. I was looking for a church. And I couldn't decide if I wanted a white church or a black church or a mixed, diverse church at really my sophomore year in high school. But by my senior year, I was evaluating 3 different churches. There were 3, one was Overland Park Church of Christ, and there was Lenexa Christian Center, and then there was Kansas City Church of Christ. And Kansas City is the church that studied the Bible with me. And because of that, I became a disciple, and I understood what covenant was, and got baptized December 1st, 2001. And at the time when I was looking for a church, looking for community, ended up getting diversity, and I was really looking for people to help me to understand how to work through my sin. But then became a Christian, and then really started to understand that that's just the first of many conversions in a way, and when it comes to discipleship. So that's me in a nutshell as far as my conversion, becoming a Christian when I was 18, and then I would say that it's been an incredible journey.
Cool, great. So what led you to become a trauma and complex trauma counselor?
So I started out as accounting, and then learned that wasn't like for me. I like the idea of handling money. Don't know that was really for me. So I went into comms, right? The most basic degree you can probably get. And then I was like, well, wait a minute, psychology. I remember I wanted to go into ministry, and then, one of the men who was like, well, have you tried counseling? Have you thought about counseling? And I was like, long story short, long ways later, I was like, you know what? I liked counseling. I liked psychology. And so I decided to major in psychology for my undergrad, and then realized you can't do anything with a psychology degree. You need to actually get a master's to use it. And so I applied to grad school. Grades were a little iffy, but I got in, and I went to Friends University to do marriage and family therapy. And as we went through the program, trauma was this like focus. This was back in like '07. But trauma was kind of this latent focus. It was there kind of in the background, but we got a good solid foundation with it. And then fast forward, when I went into private practice, I joined a practice, and the name was the Attachment and Trauma Center of Nebraska. When they brought me on board, they're like, hey, we really want you to do good couples work, but we really want to train you to be really solid in trauma. And we need you to get like EMDR certified and so forth like that. And it's like, of course, because they were renowned in the area. And that's kind of what got me probably to the next level as far as skill and treatment planning and being able to work with people when it comes to trauma. And that was 2015 that I joined that practice.
Well, your speech about racialized trauma for one of our racial reconciliation workshops was outstanding. Like I couldn't stop thinking about it for days. So we are very grateful that you did this. And we also want to know, what is your area of study at the Harding School of Theology?
Yeah, and thank you for that, by the way. That was a very tough, in some ways challenging video to do because there was so much. So at Harding, I actually I'm in the Masters of Divinity program, and it's a very long program, very intensive. In fact, this year I'm taking a break so I can kind of just integrate everything I've learned. But what I'm going to do, if I stay in the MDiv program or if I switch to a more research-based program, is I want to do research. And what I want to do is I want to really merge trauma and theology. You've seen a lot of merges around psychology and spirituality, but really trauma. And so what I'm going to do is my thesis, I'm pretty sure, is going to be biblical humanity. And I'm going to really load in trauma in the Old Testament, New Testament into that sort of housing. Because if you understand trauma, you have to understand humanity. What does it mean to be human? And so that's my course of study, sort of my thesis. It's going to take a little bit to do, but that's what I feel like I'm called to do at this point.
Oh, that's amazing. I'm getting all verklempt about this.
I haven't heard that, seriously, I haven't heard that word since grad school. That's amazing. Serious.
I use it probably far more than I
wow.
do. But so this is actually my favorite question, because as a writer, I deal a lot with story and the power of story on the brain. So we know that trauma has a huge impact on the brain. In the past, you've stated that the brain needs a conclusion. So we crave a beginning, middle, and end. Can you please break that down and then follow it up with how trauma counseling helps us with the end that we seek?
Absolutely. So our brain is looking for data. It's looking for, like you had mentioned, it's looking for that beginning and middle and an end. The thing about the brain is that when we record a trauma, it records the beginning and the middle, but when we don't get that conclusion, that resolution, it'll develop a reflex. And when our brain develops reflexes, it overdevelops it. Our brain's really good at keeping us alive. When I ask people, I even mentioned this in the presentation before, but where were they on 9/11? Mm-hmm. Everyone on this podcast can tell me exactly where they were on 9/11. For instance, Shari, where were you 9/11?
I was in an airport about to get on a plane to Los Angeles, and my flight was delayed, and that's why I wasn't in the air when the whole thing happened. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And my husband was in building 7. So
no way.
Yeah, he had to have trauma counseling afterwards because he was at the window and saw people jumping. So yeah, it was pretty. So yes, there's your beginning and your middle, I guess. I don't know if there's an end to that, to be honest.
Yeah, and so it's interesting with New York. When you look at, this was at a specialized trauma workshop that I went to. When you look at New York, about 50% of the folks were able to resolve, they got their conclusion, their end. Mm-hmm. But the other 50%, typically, when you looked at the trauma that was experienced by the population, that directly experienced, 50% sort of developed a complex trauma in New York. And part of that has to do with, for instance, complex trauma is when your trauma has trauma, right? You already have other traumas, now you have this thing. And so your brain is really perplexed. And I think that it's interesting in New York, now all of a sudden you found people who they didn't just, their resilience wasn't there. to be able to return to a normal functioning of life. And so that's typically what happens is people that get anxiety or depression, which anxiety and depression are really the same thing at different speeds. And so then that's the portal. That's what gets them in the door. And now they're having panic attacks. They're getting vapor locked and they don't know why. Well, their brain has stored an experience that's dysregulating. And it's dysregulated. Our brain, obviously, it records it not just in terms of content, but in terms of intensity. And so when people are reliving, they are reliving the arousal that's associated with that, which is why it's so hard to carry a memory and it can just knock you completely off course. In fact, I had 3 clients today, and again, trauma is one of those things where it just flanks you. Like you're like, okay, I'm awesome. I can, and then this thing comes and we're de-skilled completely in the moment. And I think most people, I would say it's a part of humanity is to experience trauma. So that's kind of the nutshell, I think, of kind of how trauma, at least initially, affects the brain.
And so how do you think trauma counseling then gives us the end, closes the story?
Good question. I think that you've got to find the right type of counseling. So for example, if I were doing talk therapy, I wouldn't really be able to help people to do that. Typically when I get people, these are people who have had sometimes 5 or 6 therapists. And the reason is because you have to find a modality that's effective. So that's my first answer is how does the right form of counseling work? And it's when you can drop people into a state where they have 1 foot in the present and 1 foot in the past. And that sounds complicated, but that's part of what trauma reliving and sort of the restoration is you've got to help somebody to not have both feet in the past because they'll dissociate into it. Or if they're 2 feet in the present, now they're not connecting and we can't reprocess it if we don't do 1 foot in both. And so effective trauma counseling will help repair, meaning it finds the right pair. I think of repair as finding the right pair. Mm-hmm. And so trauma reprocessing is going to help them and really engage their brain and where it's stored and how it's stored to be able to find the right pair. So for instance, if someone was at 9/11 and they saw people jumping, or let's say someone was in a building and people didn't come out and that was stored for them. Typically what trauma does is it doesn't let you see the other things that were going on. And so it's a very important, if you're trained in trauma, you start to help people see what else was going on. And typically when you do that, they are then able to store it differently because now the trauma was not the only thing that was true about it.
Okay. That's amazing. I could go on and on about this.
Hey.
I want to know about skills and DBT and CBT and all that
wow.
stuff. But I know
my
husband works in a crisis text line. So he's gone through all of this stuff and he's just doing amazing work with it. So I'm obviously fascinated by all of it. So here's my last question for you. In our journey to heal from our trauma, what would you say are the benefits of becoming a Christian and from our continued growth in the faith?
That's a really good question. The benefits of becoming a Christian and from our continued growth in the faith. I think the thing that becoming a Christian does is it gives you what we call that adaptive conclusion. It gives you sort of the end or the conclusion of what this is all for. Typically when people go through trauma, the existential question is, well, what is all this for? Like, okay, why did I go through it? Mm-hmm. And I think what becoming a Christian does is it gives you a ministry for your misery. Mm-hmm. Unless you have a ministry for your misery will become a mystery. And it's like, why did I go through this? Well, you don't have a ministry for it. Right. Becoming a Christian is becoming a priest, where now your misery can become something that can be altered, sacrificed and offered to God, pleasing for him, and he can use it. And so I think part of the only way to actually resolve some of the most atrocious things that happens to us is to become a Christian, because you need to know that in the next life that there is something on the other side as well. So I think becoming a Christian kind of gives meaning and ties, I think, everything together, in my opinion.
Good answer. Yeah, restorative, a restorative use for your pain, and the answer. So thank you so much. Go ahead, take it, Otoma.
Tim, 1 Timothy.
Yeah. Fire away, buddy.
It's on you, buddy. You got question 5?
I do. Oh, I thought you were going to verbalize it to give me a big platform. So the question was, who is my favorite Bible character and why? And, I wish I could come up with something super creative or some kind of buried character, but I can't help but, latch on to the Apostle Paul, because I think, to me, he embodies everything about, being an evangelist, being a Christian. Here's a guy that really just was passionate all his life, and he just, through the grace of God and obviously the direct involvement of Jesus and the Holy Spirit, he went from being passionate about the wrong thing to being passionate about the right thing, which models the ability for anybody to change. And then I just really appreciated how what I perceive over the course of his life as we read his letters, how even his inner character was able to move from more of just, instead of just being an isolated, hard charging guy, he learned how to have really a lot of capacity for other people. Even if we read about the relationship he had with Mark, he went from recording in the book of Acts where he didn't want to do anything with Mark to the point where when he was in prison, he wanted to see Mark and made the statement that he was helpful to him in his ministry. And just, I don't know, to me, it's, he was cognizant of being the chief of sinners is how he describes himself. And he talked about wanting to be all things to all people. And to face the kind of rejection that he regularly faced, both from his own people, as well as those that were not his own people, and still have the same heart that Jesus, when Paul said, I would give up my own salvation if it meant the salvation of my brother Jews. It's like Jesus when he went back to Jerusalem and he was able to say, man, how I've wanted to embrace you, but you have not accepted me. I mean, that just to me embodies like one point Paul wrote, imitate me as I imitate Jesus. So that's why Paul's my favorite character. I think it, kind of touches on all the bases of our capacity to change and impact people in the world.
Kyle, who's your favorite Bible character?
Joseph.
Break that down for us.
Oh man. So Joseph is probably my guy that I use as how to get through trauma, because his field of vision stayed very wide through his trauma. And he was able to somehow, Genesis 37 through 50, somehow at the end of 50, he says a statement of, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Mm-hmm. And that's that like ultimate, okay, this guy is integrated. This guy is, his field of view stayed. And I think it's a bit of a mystery how it stayed so wide. I think it's God, but his field of vision stayed very wide and he didn't not once get bitter. So that's my guy, man. I'm not there. He's an incredible example, I think.
That's awesome. So I think the next question, number 6 is, can you please provide some guidance to help people decide on whether they need trauma counseling?
For me, it's sort of like...
This would be for Kyle.
Okay.
I'm actually kind of interested in Tim's answer on this one too, actually, but no, I really am. I always think when people get like stuck and they've been stuck for a long time, it's like, what's wrong with this person? They're stubborn. Oh, well, maybe they have a stubborn wound. Mm-hmm. And there's just stubborn wounds. I think about, for me, I went through some really hard things as a kiddo, and I come into the kingdom and I've got some really crazy attachment injuries, and I've got pleaser parts of me and things like that people don't even know how to necessarily deal with. They love this guy who they baptized, and it's, I needed counseling. I should have gotten counseling when I was a kid. Mm-hmm. And so when something has been there for a long time, or when something's just not changing, it's typically going to overwhelm a normal discipling relationship. It's just going to.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And so I would say, man, if it's overwhelming a discipling relationship, if it seems stubborn, you got to get some counseling.
Mhm. So something that's persisting for a while that you just feel like, you know what, this is kind of outside the realm of discipling. And I think that's good to know, even for leaders. Hopefully Tim can also share a few things as far as, you know, his thought process there. So I guess, Tim, did you want, what are some of your thoughts? You know, when do you maybe advise members in the church to maybe seek individuals like Kyle or others, where you say, you know what, amen, God has given me certain skills and I can help with discipling in this ways and that ways, but this is a little bit outside my realm. How do you gauge things for yourself?
One is, like Kyle said, and usually early on in my interaction with people, it's most of the time it's fairly obvious to see that there's something significant that's beyond my skill set.
Okay.
And so, like here in Omaha, I think I've had at least, between my wife and I think we've probably referred at least 12 people in the fellowship here to a very specific counselor.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing is a little bit more subtle, which to me is, if there's a continued pattern, but nothing super obvious, like, I'm struggling with these kind of really bad thoughts or whatever, but there's this barrier between the ability to love God with all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love our neighbor as ourselves. If there's a continuous pattern of that, then I also use that as an opportunity to refer people to maybe get unstuck to things that, I'm not able to help them bring out in their life or get to in a conversation. And so it's sort of like, I can do a little bit of plumbing at my house, but at a certain point in time, there's like, I can't do that. So I'm going to have to call the expert.
Right.
So
no, that's good.
The first path is pretty obvious. The second path is a little bit more subtle and requires a little bit more engagement over time. But, there's not a barometer that you can use on this. It's the Spirit guiding you, I think, and you making that decision. Like, you know what? I got somebody I think you probably should consider talking to. Would you be open to doing that?
Mm-hmm.
Here's who it is and here's his number.
I hear you. Thank you. So Kyle, I know you've been a disciple a number of years. When you kind of look back over the years, how would you say that our family of churches' view of getting counseling has changed?
It's a really good question. I tell you, you guys are asking some tremendous questions. I really love the questions you guys asked. They're really, really good. It's changed so much. So I got baptized in 2001. Not only has it changed, so since I've been a Christian, it's changed since I went and got my master's degree, my first master's, intensely, like since 2005, 2007.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of crazy because I would say almost to some degree, there's like a pendulum where to some degree you see situations where people have replaced.
I'm sorry, sorry to cut in, do you think that might have been due to the letter that we had okay, you may have been getting there, but okay.
No, you're, and I'm glad you said that rather than me. I'll respond to that. You can. Oh, okay. Man. People were placed discipling with counseling because of the skills that counselors possess, that in reality, if you're growing in your ability to disciple people and draw people out, you start to possess yourself. I don't believe that counselors inherently are just better at all these different things than really good disciplers.
Mm-hmm.
I just mean, to some degree, I think it's people started to overutilize counseling. And I think as a church, we started to over outsource discipling with other things too, like diversity. But I think in terms of, it's changed. And now you're seeing this resistance from people of like, we're becoming too counselor. And that does happen. But now you start to see certain ministers who are not anti-counseling, but they just feel like counseling has been overutilized. And there's merit to that, but then there's kind of those ministers probably need counseling too. Mm-hmm. So it's a both and it's a tough both and. I think it's kind of murky sometimes.
So when you look at I hear what you're saying to a degree as far as the swinging the pendulum, but when I think about the actual need for counseling, it seems like there still is, I'm sure you would agree, not just to, tout your profession necessarily, but there definitely is a need for more counseling in our churches, but I would probably say there's also a need for not just necessarily outsourcing the counseling, but stronger discipling relationships that kind of covers some of those, in maybe some areas were outsourced to counseling, which could have been handled through discipling. So I guess, I guess just as a starter question on that, do you feel that the ICOC leadership needs more counseling? I guess as a specific question. And the next question with that is, especially regarding how to spot trauma. So we've kind of talked about, like, Tim did a very good job of just sharing, like his plumbing at his house. So like, if it's just whatever his skill set is, he knows I can do this and I can't. Okay. But there's a point where wisdom says, ooh, I need to know very clearly what that line is, pun intended. And this is what I need to outsource at this point. So I know we've talked about that, but can you distinguish a little bit further about, like, at what point, this thing's been going on for a while, it needs just more discipling versus outsourcing? And then also just the first question, which is the benefit of, mental health training for ICOC leadership.
Okay, so let's
wrap your head around that a little bit.
Yeah, the leadership question, let me make sure I'm understanding that. So you're saying with the leadership question, you're wanting to know what specifically, because I want to answer that first.
Yes. Do you feel like that our family of churches could use more mental health training as the ICOC leadership?
There we go. Yeah. So it's a yes, and I also think they are. So when I think of I think of some of the most respected people I know have really started to embrace many. I mean, so when ministers get out of when they get out of the ministry, they go into real estate. They go into insurance and counseling, and somebody even threw another one in once. But it's true; they become counselors. Many people, I think of Greg Moretsky. I think of several other people who have really Steve Staten. He's not a professional counselor per se, but he has a lot of counseling that he does. Tim Summerlin. I mean, there's a wave of healing that is needed to occur in the upper crust of our leadership as a church. And so I actually believe, because I've had many conversations with people, that it's happening. I would say that there is a part of our crust is a movement of folks who are still holding on to something. Those people, it's almost a sense that there's this identity that some folks are still holding on to, and it's not like anti-scholarship or anti-academic and anti-counseling, but there's this like almost scarcity of identity, and like, we gotta hold to the core, and it's like, well, people are hurting. I'll give you a great example. There's a book called Oregon Trail Theology, and it talks about how every movement, typically you have the settlers and you have the pioneers. What happens in some movements is they become overly pioneer, other movements become overly settler. And there's this conflict going on in every movement. And they're like, we need to be the pioneers and we're going west. And other people are like, we need to actually do some settling. We have hurting people. We can't just be pioneers. I think as a movement, this is a long answer to your question, we are realizing the cost of being overly pioneer.
That's good. That's good.
So I think it's a both and. I know it's a long answer to your question.
Thank you. Thoughts, Tim? Shari?
I'll let Tim go first. I have thoughts.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a need for it. And, having been a recipient of the counseling myself, and it took me a while. Kyle's comparison of the Oregon Trail analogy, if you will, it's the same struggle that exists between the Great Commission gospel and the social gospel. It's never an either or. And so we got to figure out how to embrace that. But to me, the key is making sure we're helping people find the right kind of biblical counselors, along this walk. Because the guy that helped me as a professional counselor, I paid for my counseling, but we were in scripture. He was in scripture regularly. And to me, that's, and I know Kyle, when he has the opportunity, brings that into his work as well.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think we could use some help with it, and I think there does need to be some training for ministry people who maybe not can see that as quickly or have barriers to being open to that. But I also agree with Kyle that we're taking first steps, and we've got the whole outlet through Disciples Today, Counseling Connect, which is great. So there you go.
I'm glad it's not a stigma. It's becoming more normalized that people are sharing about counseling, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
Thoughts, Shari?
I still think that we're a little bit in talk therapy, though, and I'm specifically talking about trauma counseling, because trauma counseling, uh, you recognize something that may look like something else. Like, a lot of people who are weak don't come off weak, they come off angry, right? So a lot of that is trauma, but it gets counseled as if they're having fits of rage, right? And so that's why, and a lot of people at sort of, I guess if you're going to say my level of ministry, I'm a Bible talk leader, have been really, really hurt by this. That this is not trickled down, that sense of, what does trauma look like? How are the many ways that it manifests itself, so that we can be all things to all people, and we can really help the weak. So I feel like, if nothing else, we really need some training in how to spot the many manifestations of trauma.
So you're saying not so much even like on the evangelist level or paid staff, but this would be even on the Bible talk leader level to get a general knowledge and outline, if you will, that they can then elevate and get assistance as needed.
Well,
Okay.
well, I hopefully would start
Yes.
at a certain level, but yes, church wide, I just feel like we would have much a better vocabulary
Mhm.
for recognizing this.
Thank you. Anything we missed, Kyle, that you'd like to share as far as trauma? And then we'll have one last question.
Oh, no, I think you guys covered it very well. Very well.
Okay. So how can we learn more about you and your ministry, and how can we get in touch with you if individuals need counseling or need some reference?
Great question, and I appreciate you asking. I'm going to be launching my website within the next couple of days. I said that last week. It's funny. But I really am. It's truetraumatheology.com, and then my email for that will be kyleSpears@truetraumatheology.com. And that will be a primary way to get a hold of me. I've got a podcast I've started. So yes, I would love for you guys to come on mine as well. My YouTube channel, I've got a blog that I'm doing. I really hope will be helpful for people on these subjects.
Your YouTube channel name is
also True Trauma Theology.
Yep.
True Trauma Theology. And even what you guys have said today, I think I'll probably may need to do a blog or something on that. But I've got that website that'll launch in a couple of days, and that's going to be like the hub where you can go and find resources
awesome.
as well, that people, whatever you need. So
thank you for your work. And I know before we started the show, I just thanked you, and I do want to just thank you now just for really just taking up the call. I'm not sure who just encouraged you to get into to really pursue the course of being a therapist and trauma and so forth, but it's so needed. We need 10, 100 of you to really just meet the need. I'm sure the need that's out there with COVID and just with the different challenges that the minority community is facing right now. So I just want to thank you just for your work. I know I'm sure there are days that you get really tired with taking care of little Shay and doing schoolwork and trying to conjugate and all the things that you have to do there. So I just wanted to just lift you up and just say thank you for everything that you're doing.
I so appreciate that. So appreciate that.
Shari, Tim, you want to just say some words to Kyle as we wrap it up?
Kyle, thank you so much. I'm a huge fan, and a fangirl out here a little bit, but I'm so appreciative of the combo platter that you bring of theology and trauma. I just feel like that is so necessary. I'm so grateful, and I hope you will spawn little Kyles with this, so that we can be like the little Kyle yeasts across the whole church. And thank you to Tim's for for your questions, and I've really appreciated this time getting to know you both.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for inviting me to observe and be part of this conversation. Shari, it was nice to meet you. Otoma, it's always great to see you, brother. Do you ever age? I mean, that's...
No, I don't. I don't. You should see my wife, man. She's 20.
Wow. And I'll just say this, it's great having Kyle part of the church here in Omaha. We've been here 6 years, my wife and I, and
wow.
He's one of those 10 talent guys.
Tim, it's time for you to come back to Michigan. 6 years, man.
Well, I'm very nomadic, but my wife is starting to put her foot down because I've drug her around the country all of her life. And so she's ready to stop and, but, and our kids are all spread out now, but, it's just great having Kyle. He is so helpful for us in the ministry. He's a small group leader. He speaks into, what we're working on collectively as a church. Sometimes the biggest challenge, 10 talent guys like Kyle has is figuring, okay, I gotta prioritize these things and I can only do so much.
Sure.
And so he's a real blessing and, just very great contributor. In addition to that, he's also got a very evangelistic heart about him. He's always, looking for people to study the Bible with. And when he's not, he's, trying to figure out how to do that. So, it's just great to have him. And, I'm almost as tall as him at 5'10". Well, I used to be 5'10".
Oh, you guys are great.
He's a profoundly, gifted guy. And it's just a real blessing and joy to have him and his family. And I better stop before, something explodes.
I appreciate that. And thank you for letting me on today. This is my first time meeting you, Otoma, and I've seen you do so much, especially on social media. And Shari, I appreciate you. I look forward to getting your contact info and connecting and just hearing more of your story. And Tim, I will see you tomorrow, it looks like.
Good, buddy.
Well, again, thank you everyone for joining this episode.
Thanks.
Please click like and consider subscribing. Thank you.